Good evening, everybody, and welcome to everybody physically in the room, and also to those of you on the live stream. I always feel like I should be doing a Madonna when I've got one of these in my hand, although Peter offered me Elvis as an alternate, so if anything weird happens during the evening, it's his fault. So look, everybody, thank you so much for making time to come this evening. For those of you physically in the room, it's probably important to say there are no planned fire alerts. So if there is a fire, we all just exit through the doors and gather outside in the courtyard, and don't run, walk. Is always the good advice. Now, it's very poignant that we're here in Toynbee Hall, and I was delighted to see Sean. I saw Sean Williams somewhere sneak. Hello, Sean. So Sean has been a long-time collaborator working with us. She's in a new role now, but she was one of my inspirations coming into this whole area of financial inclusion. So it's lovely to see her here. And Toynbee Hall is a very poignant setting, I think, for the launch of this type of research. For those of you who aren't familiar with it yet, it has a long history in addressing inequality for people from most disadvantaged communities, you know, really anchored in the East End of London. And on the podium in the corner, for those of you who want to peek later, it's got all of the people who've spoken here over the years as they've really explored what are the things that we can do to really affect change, to include everyone in society. And my favourite portrait next door, where we're for drinks later, is the portrait of Samuel and Henrietta Barnett, and you can all look at the portrait and assess who you think was the driving force in change, and I'm not saying any more than that. So it's really fabulous to have everyone here. You know, this research is, I think, really important. You know, we know that people from minority ethnic backgrounds had very different outcomes in terms of their financial well-being. So really starting to get behind the what's driving that and what are the things specifically that we can come together and work on to change is really the focus of this research. So the format of this evening is we're going to have the opportunity to hear from the team who did the research, and then from a fantastic group of panellists to actually really move us into the so what now, which is the important piece of any of these things. I'm never a fan of doing any research unless we know what are we going to do with it so that it actually does affect change and really make a difference. And I'm delighted that so many of you are here in the room and also online, because we'd love to get as many of the ideas from people here engaging with this area to really sort of step forward and think, okay, so what could we do? Because anything is possible, and we're standing on the shoulders of giants being in Toynbee Hall, so I think that gives us a great setup. So I think that in terms of kicking off, and it's brilliant, Aisha is now regretting not sitting close enough to kick me. But what's marvellous is I'm going to hand over now to Aisha Begum, who's led this research project on behalf of Fair4All Finance. And she and the research team are going to take us through the key headlines of the findings. So as you're listening, if you've got questions, do pop them into the chat or jot them down. And then we'll, after we've heard the research, then we'll move on to hearing from the panellists and hearing from you to work out what we can do to make things really different in the future. So Aisha, without further ado, over to you.
Great, thanks, Asha. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces. And hello to everyone online as well. We've got about 100 people who are joining the live stream, so really exciting to see the turnout for tonight. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Aisha. I'm the Strategy and Impact Programme Manager at Fair4All Finance, and I've been leading the work for the last 2 years. I'm joined by Katie and Kenny here from the research agencies involved, and I'll let you both just quickly introduce yourselves, if that's okay.
Sure. Hi, hey everyone. My name's Katie Hawkins. I'm a research director at Ipsos. Actually, there's a big team of other researchers, some of whom are here today as well, that worked on this with us. So, hello.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kenny Maffedon. I'm the co-founder and managing director at Clearview. So our fabulous team worked on this project alongside Ipsos and the Fair4All Finance. And yeah, it's been a nice collaboration.
Great.
You don't hear that every day, but it's been...
So we're going to take the next 20 or 25 minutes to give you a bit of an overview of the research and understand the why, the how and the what of what we did. Before I get started, you'll have received a copy of the handout on your chairs, which is a summary of the findings, but I'd urge you all to follow the QR code in it so you can hear the sort of rich experiences people shared with us and hear more about that. For those of you online, hopefully somebody is going to pop it in the chat for you so you can follow through as well. Before I kick off, just a quick few thank yous. One to the steering committee, who've really helped with steering the report, really, and giving us their advice. A couple of them are here on the panel today. A couple of thank yous to the colleagues, in particular Neil and Max, who've helped bring this together. And then, last but not least, the Lived Experience Advisory Board, and some of those guys are online tonight too. Kenny will talk a little bit about who they are and their role, but they've really helped support in shaping the hypothesis, sharing their own lived experience, and then thinking about what does that mean for the calls to action. So I'll kick off and talk about why we wanted to do the research. So from a Fair4All Finance perspective, we know that people from minority ethnic backgrounds face greater exclusion in the UK, in particular financial exclusion. And there are multiple issues that cause that. That could be around education, employment, socioeconomic status. But this work, we wanted to hone in on 3 different things. So we wanted to better understand people's lived experience and their perception of mainstream financial services. We wanted to better understand how products and services on offer by financial providers could be influencing financial exclusion. And then ultimately, we wanted to understand where there are areas for improvements, and that's within the design of products and services that financial providers can then take action on. So that's why the work is really important to us. I'm going to pose the same question to Katie and Kenny, and why that was important to you both from your respective agencies.
Cool, thanks, Aisha. Yes, I think one of the most important things that research can do is it can really shine a light on those overlooked topics and areas, and that's what this research was really an opportunity to do. It has huge potential to massively change the financial outcomes for underserved people across the UK. So, good research is all about finding those stories, those lesser heard stories, amplifying them to the right audiences. So that was really the kind of opportunity, was connecting those stories with the industry and hopefully driving some real change.
Yeah, thank you. From Clearview's perspective, I guess a lot of the work we do is working with people who are from traditionally marginalised or underrepresented backgrounds, particularly in research. So as many of you know, when a lot of times you hear, this is what people think, the question is what people. And a lot of times we tend to work with people who are described as hard to reach. In our world, it's just people are just not bothered to engage. And so that tends to be, a lot of the projects we work on is very much about how do we get these people engaged and ensure that they have the opportunity to be involved in decision making. And this is why research is very important. And so particularly for a project like this, when you want to know about what products or services, what's been people's experiences and how best to offer them, it's best to actually talk to the people. And as you know, a lot of times in research, and even with experts, organizations like Fair4All, other people, they can be very much, not Fair4All by the way, I'm just talking about the sector. There can be a lot of pride in the fact that, oh yeah, we know all of this, but the question is, what about the people who live it day to day? And so for us, really about how we can create the balance of having lived experience and learned experience and merge that together to create something beautiful.
Thanks, Kenny. So as Sasha mentioned when she opened, we know the potential influence that this work can have, and we really wanted to make sure that we do the work justice. And part of that was getting the methodology right. And it was important to make that as robust as possible. People from minority ethnic groups, it's not a homogenous group, it's representing so many different experiences and needs. And so we were really careful about how we approached that. So again, I'm going to let Kenny and Katie sort of speak to that. Maybe Katie, if you want to kick off.
Yeah, definitely. So it was really important to get this right. So we did design an approach that was robust, needs to be robust in order to be credible and impactful. So it was lots of different multiple elements pieced together, and as we talked about, it was a collaboration that did work really well. So we started off with a knowledge audit drawn down from our the Ipsos Financial Research Survey. So this is a long-running continuous survey of people's personal financial products and holdings and behaviours, and that was a really rich source to kind of understand the status quo amongst all the different groups we wanted to look at. So that was used to help frame frame the findings and the research. Then we conducted a survey of 2,000 UK adults aged 18 plus, and those interviews were split between a large group of people from the minority ethnic groups and also a white British group to act as a comparison. So we were sort of able to compare the experiences across a range of different groups. Fieldwork was conducted, getting very methodological. There is lots more detail in the report, but we did it online, but also face-to-face as well, just to make sure that we were widening that access. And we set interlocking quotas across age, gender, social grade, and working status within the ethnic groups as well. So just to ensure we had that kind of deep level of representation, of it being representative within those diverse audiences, as Aisha said. And then also Ipsos conducted a series of expert interviews as well. So the aim there was to hear from a breadth of informed voices, just to kind of give us more perspectives and more input into our findings. So we spoke to community leaders, credit agency, regulatory experts, people from fintechs and traditional banks, because as you'll see in the report, there's sort of different experiences across different types of banks and products and services, Islamic finance provider, and also a partner scheme operator as well. So a real mix there. And our intention was to be as robust and representative as possible. So it wasn't a case of just a single source of truth. We were really trying to triangulate in on our findings and ensuring they were corroborated across different sources. And alongside that, we had the fantastic stuff from Clearview as well.
Thank you. So in terms of the work we've done, so it's twofold. So one of the things we've done was recruit a lived experience advisory group who essentially worked on the project in relation to coming back to what was mentioned earlier around shaping the hypothesis of actually just looking at what are the key questions we're trying to ask here. The group also served as a group to provide us with accountability as well, to make sure that actually we are doing what we said we're going to do. Because a lot of times when you're doing research, you can get excited and start going in different directions and think about, let's explore this, let's explore that. But the group very much kept everybody on track and also provided insights as well, just from their own lived experience. In addition to that, we also had exploration labs, which is basically our version of participatory and equitable ways of getting people together to have conversations. So we did a number of those, and a lot of that is what shaped the work that Ipsos later did when they carried out the survey.
Great. And then with the findings from Ipsos and Clearview, we were still keen to make sure that there was a co-creation element to the calls to action. So again, we called on the Lived Experience Advisory Group and the practitioner group that is made up of sort of mainstream banks and building societies to help think about the so what and what does that mean for taking it forward. So they've been instrumental in building those calls to action. In terms of thinking about the findings then, the report findings are pretty wide-reaching. I'd probably break them into about 8 key themes. So they are around experience and perception of discrimination, lack of transparency, distrust for mainstream financial services, people's experience in terms of the products and channels that they use or don't use, lack of personalisation when it comes to what's on offer, barriers to access and information, and then also lack of cultural representation. We're not going to be able to cover the detail under all of those tonight, and I recommend going away and reading them in the main report, but what we will do is cover sort of the main things that stood out for us and anything that felt quite surprising as well. So I'll hand it back.
Yeah, so we just pulled out a few standout findings. Obviously, this is hot off the press in terms of the report. So one of the things that sort of first popped out for us was just a lower financial resilience amongst the minority ethnic groups that we surveyed. So in terms of the, particularly in terms of the products that they're holding. So read out some stats for you. So 30% of people from minority ethnic groups hold a pension versus 48% people from the white British group, so that's a really substantial difference. And even things like auto-enrolment, obviously not quite doing enough to close the gap there. 62% of people from minority ethnic groups are holding a savings account versus 68% for the white British group. 21% are holding a cash ISA versus 31% from the white British group. 21% have life insurance versus 26%. So these are all significant differences, and these are all the kind of products that make a difference in terms of people's resilience and ability to kind of withstand sort of things that are going on in their financial life. So really significant findings, and it is also an issue because we sort of saw a bigger gap in terms of the needs for these types of products as well. So people from minority ethnic groups are more likely to have experienced a life event such as moving house, starting a new job, buying a car, all those things where you need financial products. So that was 68% versus 51% in terms of experiencing those events. Yet people from minority ethnic groups are holding fewer products to help them navigate those events. So on average, it's 4.8 products held for the white British group and 4.3 for all minority ethnic groups. So again, there's a big difference there.
So I was just taking it in myself as well. Yeah, I guess just to kind of speak to that. So in terms of when we did do the labs and spoke to people as well, I guess one of the things that we did see played out was that people who we spoke to spoke about the fact they found it daunting or they avoided actually interacting with their provider. And so there's a lot of discussion around this issue of distrust and discrimination, which we'll go and talk about later because I don't want to be jumping themes. But people did talk about the fact that, particularly the ones who had negative experiences, that they didn't feel they had the luxury in order to find another bank or go somewhere else because technically the experience may just be the same or even worse, which is something that we saw that came out. And I guess that's something to be mindful of, that sometimes people can feel like they actually don't really have any other alternative.
And in terms of discrimination, we did see that levels of discrimination experience was high, reported a high number. So 22% say they've experienced discrimination due to race when dealing with financial providers, or have 24% friends and family who have done so as well, which felt incredibly high.
And I guess to link back to that, so there was also, for us, a key finding around just the fact that people spoke about, they felt there was a racist undertone to questions and comments that they received, particularly for them feeling like they're being treated overtly in a suspicious way. And that's to use their language, not mine. But I guess particularly when they're asking for small requests. So these are not big requests, just asking for small things and feeling like actually they're being judged, particularly for their race and everything else. But I feel, coming back to what Katie mentioned earlier, you can also see from the survey that there's this sense of a scale of the issue, that these are not isolated incidents.
Another finding was around transparency. So we definitely saw there was an experience of a lack of transparency in some cases. So in terms of applying for products, lending products, we saw actually the rejection rates were similar across the two groups we were looking at. So 34% and 39% respectively. But in terms of the transparency around those decisions, 27% of people from minority ethnic groups say they never actually found out the reason, versus 16% for people from white British groups. So that does sort of highlight perhaps a failure in communication and customer care when it comes to serving people from minority ethnic groups.
Basically, the call found that. I think one of the things you'll realize, I think, with myself and Kate, is that the call that we did very much complemented a lot of what was seen in the survey, and very much to show that things weren't just isolated events or incidents, as I mentioned earlier. So coming back to this point around transparency, that was something which was commonly mentioned, that people didn't know the reason why they were rejected for particular offers. And again, that just fuels the distrust that people already have with financial service providers. Because again, what one person might get as a response and what someone else gets may not even be the same, and it doesn't quite make sense. And then I guess if we're also talking about how people use certain channels, so in order that they don't have to worry about the fear of discrimination, right? So I may be jumping there. Okay. Which is fine. But just talking about the fact that a lot of people spoke about how they're using alternative means in order to work around the banks, right? Which we know historically and culturally have always been there. But for example, things around, like, there's not really much Sharia banking support services, anything else like that. So therefore, a lot of people are doing things like partners and other ways in order to raise money. It may not be regulated. There may not be necessarily a safety net, but for a lot of people, at least they have access and they have availability, and there's transparency as well. And so that's just a key thing to mention. I think one of the things I will say as well, which really came out, is just the fact that some of the stuff we're sharing is not really rocket science or big revelations to anybody who's actually spent time with people who are facing these particular circumstances. But again, I think the report and working with Ipsos, what it really did show is the scale of things, and that actually isn't just your few mates that are just not having access. It's actually a widespread problem.
Yeah, and we had some stats again to sort of corroborate what Kenny was saying there in terms of reasons why they might be going to other sources for support and advice. So we definitely saw that minority ethnic groups are more likely to seek help from a financial provider, but not have as positive an experience. So 45% of minority ethnic groups are seeking help from a financial provider for various reasons, opening accounts, opening products, versus 25% for the white British group. On the flip side, 45% of the white British group had a very positive experience after seeking that help, but that number dropped to 29% amongst the minority ethnic group. So again, a big disparity in terms of their positive experience they're having. And that's playing through into some of the different channels. So one area in particular where the experience was relatively lower or poorer was in branch, but also actually relatively lower in mobile banking as well. So just pointing at a couple of areas where the experiences are lower amongst the minority ethnic groups. One area where they were generally more positive was online. And again, the report kind of goes into some reasons as to why that might be the case.
Back to me. The other thing we saw was a desire to see better cultural representation as well. People wanted to see people who understood their cultural needs and desires as well. So, and that's at customer service level, but also at product design level as well. I think the main thing that I'll point out from all of these findings was that they're not easily explained by age or income. Things around product holdings, discriminations, the experiences people had with channels, they're seen across all age groups and for the majority of the income brackets. And I think it's important to say that the interplay between all of these findings, so the discrimination and the distrust, they're happening now, like Kenny said, they're not isolated. And there is an element of historical context to that as well that financial service providers need to understand as well. And better understanding the needs of people from different ethnic minority groups will go a long way in helping to sort of shape products and services that meet people's needs. I'll ask one final question before I sort of summarise what the calls to actions are. One of the things we were keen to do as part of this research was disaggregate where possible, and I know that's something that a lot of people are interested in seeing in terms of not just looking at ethnic minority communities as a whole, but sort of digging further into the details. So maybe you guys could speak to what did you see, were there any surprises? Yeah.
So actually, in a lot of cases, the findings were really consistent at a disaggregated level. So they were consistent experiences across different ethnic groups. So, for example, consistently less likely to hold a pension. That was, and there's other findings as well. But we did see some relevant differences. So I talked earlier about experiences of discrimination. That was higher for people from black backgrounds. So 1 in 3 from African backgrounds experienced discrimination versus 1 in 5 from all minority ethnic groups. So again, a big difference there. And while there is another finding was, while there's definitely a desire across ethnic groups for more tailored products and services, we did see this was especially high for some groups. So people of Muslim faith and from Pakistani and Bangladeshi backgrounds as well scored much higher on really wanting to have products and services tailored to their religious and cultural needs in particular.
Is there anything you want to add, Kelly? No, back to me. So I'll quickly summarise the calls to actions. They are in your handout, but the full length of them is definitely in the report. There's about 5 pages of them, so I will do a very quick summary of them all. So there's 7 in total. The first one is around being inclusive by design. So it's about thinking about the customer journey and how do you involve harder to reach voices in things like product development, testing and distribution, and then thinking about how do you remove unconscious bias. The second one is around transparency in decision making. So how do you take robust steps in eliminating bias in decision making? And then how do you go about communicating the decisions you're making clearly to people? And then taking that step further to think about how do you support people in their needs. The third is around breaking down barriers. So how can processes be simplified to improve access? And then how can language be better improved to improve accessibility? And that's not just speaking about spoken language, but also financial language. The fourth is around cultural representation, which I touched on, and that's about increasing representation across the whole business, and that's to really support that inclusive design element to it. The fifth is around engaging with communities. So how can providers work with trusted community groups? How can you work with culturally trusted figures to improve understanding of people's needs, and then ultimately improve that sort of trust with financial services and improve that perception around transparency as well. The sixth is around financial resilience and your role in strengthening that. So what can you do beyond just the products and services you offer? How can you go and build people's financial resilience in the short and long term? And then the final one is a call on regulation. So how can regulation help support firms to apply an ethnicity lens to the consumer duty and apply that to the customer journey and products and services to deliver good outcomes? And it's about using existing forums like the Credit and Market Information Study and the current consultation open on D&I, and thinking about how can we use that to influence change for people from minority ethnic groups. So that's a really high-level overview of the calls to action. I'm going to pass it back to Sasha and the panel to think about the what and how, and we take it forward.
Wonderful, thanks team. And thanks already to those of you online who are posting questions, and I'm hoping people in the room. What's great, I can see people with their pens making their notes, so we should be good for that. And I think that while I'm speaking, magically we should have popping up on screen, as if by magic, welcome Tom Kenrick from NatWest. So what I'm going to do is, rather than me ineloquently introduce my panel, I'm going to turn to each of them in turn and ask them to introduce themselves and then say a little bit about why this work is important to them and any key aspects related to their work that they think could be really important to bear it to mind. Panel, you have 2 minutes each, so that you can actually pay attention to it. I have an order, but I may mess around with it, I may not. We might mix it up, we'll see. But I think that what I'll do is I'll maybe go to Tom, who's online first. So Tom Kenrick, who is Head of Social Strategy Impact and Impact at NatWest. It would be great, Tom, just to hear, what's your name, where do you come from, why is it important, and what else would you like to say in your opening comments?
Thanks, Scylla. This is like Eurovision, isn't it? Hello from a very, very chilly Edinburgh. So excuse the gilet, but I am freezing. Anyway, to the point of this, you can clearly hear me because I can see that Sasha is grinning and I'm saying stupid things. So I think most important to say, we're very committed to ensuring that people from minority ethnic groups don't face either exclusion or discrimination in the financial system. And just thinking back, in 2020, we appointed an ethnicity task force, which was led by 3 colleagues from minority ethnic backgrounds. And I think Sham might be in the room, so she should give everyone a wave. And they work with our leadership and they work with colleagues across the bank to identify issues and opportunities that would accelerate our progress on race and ethnicity. And in October 2020, we launched a report that was the outcome of their work, and that was called Banking on Racial Equality, which included 10 commitments that we were going to take forward for meaning positive difference. And one of the things in that was a commitment to further research, both internally, but also with partners. So we published a report in 2021 about ethnic minority led businesses, and obviously this piece of research that we're launching with you today. So it's now been 3 years since that report was published, and we're pleased with the progress that we've made, but obviously we recognise there's lots more to do, and this report today helps us understand some of those things where there is more to do. But I'll just give you a few examples of the sorts of things that we have done so far. So in terms of just helping serve our customers well, one of the things we've done is we're building a diversity of lived experience into our product and service design. So we created something called the Vulnerable Customer-Led Inclusive Design Panel. And that meets every month, and it brings the voices of people with lots of different lived experiences and also key charities that represent those groups into the product design and the customer journey process. And then actually when we're dealing with customers every day, we've done things like introducing translation services that can help customers for whom English isn't their first language. And then on what we had that, but people didn't know we had it. So we introduced something called Banking My Way, where customers could either tell their branch or through the app specifically tell us through this disclosure tool that English isn't their first language, and they could tell us how they would like to be supported. So that just reduces that kind of fear or barrier. And at the same time, thinking about our staff and how they deal with customers, we introduced cultural literacy workshops, which have been delivered to our frontline staff across the UK, which help them understand things like cultural, religious, and other socio-economic factors. Easy for me to say. It's because my teeth are chattering. And then on the thinking more internally about increasing the diversity of our colleagues and our leadership, we've really focused on this. There's been a significant increase in stronger Black representation in our early career programs, but we've also done things like creating something called an inclusive ambassador program, and that means that people from across the bank get trained up, and they'll sit in on interviews with areas that aren't necessarily anything to do with them, just to provide that completely independent voice in the recruitment process and make sure that we're really thinking about inclusive principles. And obviously we're supporting our minority and ethnic colleagues as well to accelerate their development. And our employee-led network around our multicultural employee-led network also has a big allies network as well. And those obviously really help with culture and being a bit of a driving force. And then finally to communities, so customers, colleagues, communities. We do things like running scam and fraud awareness sessions. We've actually done those in a variety of languages, including a Punjabi one that was live on the Sky Seek channel. And we have something which we call the Financial Foundations workshops, which we deliver through staff, but we also deliver in partnership with charities working with minority ethnic groups. So that's just a handful of the examples. So if it was a bit of a long list, but you know, whilst there's more to be done here, I just wanted to give a range of examples of the work that we have done and to demonstrate that the foundation is there. And this is something that we've been taking very seriously already. 3 years on from that report, we've just appointed 3 new task force co-leads. So they'll obviously bring a fresh perspective, and they'll be working across our business and specifically taking outputs from this research and other work that we do to make sure that we sort of keep the pressure up and hold our leaders to account and keep progressing. So, Sasha, we're obviously committed to working closely with you and the wider industry to bring about positive change. And, you know, we're delighted to be part of this report. Thank you.
Brilliant, Tom, and yeah, wishing you warm vibes from this room heading up to you in Edinburgh. We'll come back to you in a little bit. Just one other person who couldn't be here this evening was Sarah Montgomery from the FCA. She's been taken poorly. I don't know how many other people are sort of like counting down whether you're going to escape the lurgies going around as we head into Christmas, but unfortunately she's been felled. But what is wonderful is that, we do have representative from, so thank you, Barbara, lovely to see you. We do have representatives from the FCA here, I think, and also they just sent a note, which I thought I'd just sort of pass through, because I think that, you know, we know that in any of these areas, it's going to be collaboration between financial services institutions, between regulators, between other sort of actors on the stage who can work together to actually say, well, what will we do differently? And Tom gave some great examples. But I think the FCA, what's great is, they've welcomed the publication of the report, which you cannot take for a given, but also that they're very keen to take forward some of the recommendations, particularly the one which they've already launched a consultation on, which is around the representation of people from minority ethnic backgrounds in financial services. And if you've not taken an opportunity to have a look at that yet, that consultation closes on the 18th of December, so there's still time to put in views of what are the practical things that you think you could really do to make a difference. I think that, they also, said that, our research, it backs up what they find in their financial lives survey. So, if there's anyone out there going, I'm not sure about this, we've now got multiple sources of data enriched by people's lived experience and voice on the ground, which actually say, yes, this is real, and that there are real opportunities to do something about it. And I think that, the getting people from minority ethnic backgrounds represented into financial services really helps people to be aware of some of the issues and challenges and do something about them. So, Sarah, I don't know if you're watching online or whether you're properly tucked up in bed, but hopefully I represented a little bit of the SDA's views, and thank you for sending those over to us. So, without further ado, Muna, can I hand over to the wonderful Muna Yassin? She's my heroine, really, so it's always good to be sitting next to her.
Right back at you,
Sasha, you can be my hero. It's all good. It's all good.
We're inclusive on this panel. So just to say that it's been a pleasure to be part of this process and to have the early conversations that we had a couple of years ago, Sasha, and to see it come to fruition. Rooted Finance is a specialist debt advice charity based in London. And debt advice is our core offer, but we also do campaigning, training, all around financial inclusion. And I'd like to say organisations like Rooted Finance are really at the front line of the work to support people who are in financially vulnerable situations. Ourselves, our partners, Money A&E, also represented here today. I think the report focuses on engagement, the experience and the view of minority ethnic communities across financial services. And at Rooted, this plays out to us in real life situations. So we see the reality behind those experiences. Distrust has already been mentioned, reluctance to engage, and the sense of injustice that actually burns within people because they don't have their voice represented. I think most importantly, we pick up the pieces. We could pick up the pieces of the policy failures, but also the actual reality around debt and problem debt. So you'll see from the report, the proportion of problem debt for minority ethnic communities is much higher than the rest of the population. Within that, within the ethnicities themselves, there's differences. So you'll find that black communities are more represented in problem debt. They are more likely to have more creditors. They're more likely to have priority debts. And that's not acceptable. There's got to be something that we can do about that. I think the other key thing is thinking about the lived experience angle. So it was great to see the lived experience process driven through this research. But I, like Sasha, don't like to see researchers sitting on the table, and we've been thinking throughout what are the things that we can do to take this piece of work forward. And I think one of the things that we'd like to be able to do is contribute where our expertise lies. So at Money A&E and Rooted Finance, we are black-led organisations working on the front line, have a lived experience kind of lens. So we are launching the Racial Justice Network, thankfully and gratefully funded by Trust for London through their groundbreaking Racial Justice Fund. And the aims of this is to really look at how we can support people have their causes and their voice represented through the financial services sector, and really taking on two key pieces of the calls to action. So the area around cultural representation and proportionality in service delivery, but also looking at how we can support representation throughout the financial services, and therefore increasing and supporting lived experience design and inclusive design as part of that. We're also focused on the area around the ethnicity premium. We understand and are very familiar with the poverty premium working in this space. But actually, if you think about the additional barriers to people of colour and the additional costs to them, just because of their ethnicity, this is something that isn't looked at in enough detail as far as we're concerned. And it contributes to the structural racism that we see in our society. So that's another key area that we'd like to take forward. I think Sasha says in her forward of the report that actually thinking through how we can ensure that an area that's had so little kind of focus on it, how do we ensure that that is now looked upon and recognised as it should be? So the focus will be research, it will be practical campaigning, and it will be a 5-year program to ensure that we're working with anybody who wants to work with us in this space to ensure that we're making those systemic barriers go away, but also making sure that those messages come directly from the people that it experiences, and it has an impact on their life. So I'll leave it there, Sasha.
Brilliant. And I have to say, Muna and Jerry and Sham, who are all sitting here, have been incredibly important members of the steering group. So thank you so much for your work. I'm going to come next. I'm just messing with people here, Peter. I'm going to actually come to Femi next. So Femi Adigan, would you like to add your comments, please?
Thank you, Sasha. So Femi Adigan, I work for Standard Life, which is part of the Phoenix Group. So it's in the retirement, savings, and pensions, basically, industry. So to be honest, we welcome the findings from this report. There was actually a bit of a personal touch it had for me, actually, when I think about it and relate it back to my father, part of the Windrush generation. So a lot of what is being said just really resonates with me. I think it's really interesting because when we look at financial inclusion, we're obviously looking at it from a retirement perspective, for the whole society, for everyone in the UK. And to do that, we really need to understand better what minority ethnic groups are really going through. So, a bit like what Muna said, this obviously report focused on a lot of the engagement and the qualitative research as well. We've typically focused a lot on the quantitative research, so more about the numbers. You've obviously probably heard of the gender pay gap, and so we've reported, for example, we are doing some work on the ethnicity pay gap to understand a bit more what it's about. I think so. It's something that's always resonating with the industry. But one of the other questions I was asked about was what learnings could we have? And I guess you heard Thom talk about, for example, the scams workshops that they set up essentially, and we're able to leverage. We're able to host them in different languages. So that's some things we've done as well. We're actually partnering with a fintech which will be able to digest all of our information and essentially report it back to an individual in their chosen language. And of course, there's a variety of other things. I think one of the things that touched me is, Sasha, obviously you spoke about the Islamic finance provider that you worked with. And in the pensions industry, obviously a lot of people are automatically enrolled into their pension. But of course, as Sasha and I know, and some of you, actually, some of their investments are not always Sharia compliant. So there's a lot of work that I'm doing in the industry at the moment, and specifically at Standard Life, to see how we can actually help those individuals, and not just from an investment perspective, but actually we want to look at people's finances holistically. So even how we can give them financial education, because of course that's going to be different to your conventional, traditional financial education. And the last point I wanted to make was the lived experience. I think for me, that's a fundamental part of this report, and it's something that we are looking to leverage internally as well as we look to build our own, behavioural finance team, and also understand how individuals interact with our products. But thank you.
Admirably brief and succinct. Thank you very much. And then last but not least, another amazing member of our steering group who's been a great collaborator over the years is Peter Tutton from Step Change. And Peter, it'd just be great if you could draw out again, why is it important to you and what role you think that service providers can play?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Step Change, we're a debt advice charity, and we sort of do two main things to really boil it down. One thing we do is we're a service provider, and we're kind of a bit like, if you think of sort of mainstream banks and then services that are targeted for particular communities, we're a bit like the mainstream. We sort of 200,000, 180,000 people a year we advise. So that's where we come from. So we do that, but we're also advocates. So I'm in the policy team. So we try and change things and make it better for our clients, for people experiencing debt and people vulnerable to debt. So I'm interested in this report is really important for both those things. Thinking about the advocacy bit and the policy bit first. So we're concerned about social justice. I mean, you talked about injustice. So that's a general concern for kind of consumer advocates. As a debt advice charity, we're particularly concerned of the harm that debt causes. And what we know in our research about how one of the ways, the really harmful things that happen with debt is where people can't get the help they need quickly because barriers to getting that help, and some of those barriers about people thinking how they're going to be treated or how they have been treated in the past, a lack of trust, worries about the sort of service, will they be judged? So there's a strong connection to the issues raised in this report and things that we know to be really, really harmful for people who are in financial difficulty. So it resonates with us very, very, very closely. It's also really important because we know, as a policy advocate, how hard it is to change things. Change is difficult to achieve, and what we're talking about, these are really crunchy findings in this report, and we're talking about often, very large organisations, a very big sector, financial services, and it's hard to move things. So one of the things that report like this do is what financial services does have is it has some really good advocates within it for change and for inclusion and for justice. And one of the things that's really heartening about this piece of work is the practitioners group that's come out of it. So there's already some stepping stones to change there. And reports like this, it's hard if you are one of those advocates to have your voice heard within the organisation. This report and the strength of the findings and the quality of the research it gets it to the top. It means at a senior level, people take more notice of it, and it's easier for advocates to push that agenda through. So in that reason, it's really, really important to us. The second reason it's important to us is we're a service provider. As I said, we advise about 180,000 people a year, and we operate across the UK, and many of our clients will be people from different ethnic communities. And like any other mainstream service provider, we have to understand and we have to know how our services are affecting our clients and what we can do to make sure that they get good outcomes, proper service, don't experience any barriers to service. So what these recommendations, these 7 recommendations, give us as a service provider is a roadmap. It gives us a way to start thinking and structuring, or think harder and structure better the way that we look into our data and look at what our clients are experiencing to make sure our services are working and to improve them. The final bit on that is, what I like about this report, is the importance of data. So financial services, people who are in financial service would have heard of the Consumer Duty. You'd have to be on Mars not to hear about it. Potentially game-changing approach, but essentially what it is all about is what you have to do if you really want to treat your customers well, you have to understand them. And that means you have to gather data and you have to give insight, lived experience, as people have talked about here. This report gives a leg up to that, and it shows that if you actually do the research, what you will find is everything isn't rosy. That people do need, you need to look at your services, the way that they work, you need to listen to what your customers are saying and the experiences they've had, and that's the route to making it better. So all those 3 things this report brings. It brings advocacy, it brings a roadmap to change, and I've forgotten the 3rd thing already, so there we go. But it's so fantastic work, well done, all those involved.
Brilliant, Peter, thank you. And I'm conscious just in terms of wanting to really allow as much time as possible for questions. So I think Neil Alexander has the pleasure of being the man with the microphone. And I know some people had already sort of sent something in advance, but I think Neil will go around and try and reach people. And I've also got a couple of coming in online. If you have got questions online and you haven't sent them through, please do so now. So I think first, Sharon Collard,
Hello.
Excellent.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks so much for the report. And I was just reflecting. I think somebody will probably correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure, but I think this is the first major study of this kind since Omar Khan did some work on financial exclusion amongst minority ethnic communities when he was at Runnymede Trust, and I think that's probably the early 2000s. So it's taken us 20 years to have another report, and I'm sure the picture has not changed very much, which is very sad. But my question kind of followed on from what Peter was saying about the Consumer Duty. And I was wondering what the panel thought about, should it be the case that financial services firms are required to actually set targets or, have targets set for them that they monitor and publicly report on? Do you think that would make a difference in terms of some of the issues that we're talking about today? I think it kind of speaks to Femi's point about the work on gender and ethnicity pay gaps.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's funny because I've been talking about this today. I know the people online can't participate here, but can I just see, randomly, a show of hands, who would actually feel comfortable your service providers actually collecting your data? So if you're putting up your hand, that means you're happy with them being comfortable collecting it. Sorry, it is a safe space. I think that kind of entails the problem, right? Ultimately, us as financial providers, we have to start building trust with the customers we're serving. And in order to measure anything or manage anything, it has to be measured. And I know all the providers that I've worked for example, they collect age, they collect gender, and it stops there really. And so I think the first thing is, it's really, how do we collect this data? It can be done. Obviously, the acronym GDPR, which we all know, scares people. It's a bit of a yawn-inducing moment, but it's also real because we have to understand how to protect these individuals' data ultimately, and they can't be used in the wrong way, and that's why we have a trust issue. But I think it's a great question. Obviously, the FCA does have a consultation out at the moment, which is focusing on, I guess I would say, diversity and inclusion from a colleague perspective. But absolutely, if they're going to, for example, suggest that firms need to have in place processes to identify vulnerable customers and investigate and act, data is going to be essential to that. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. And Sarah from the FCA, I think, she was very keen to say, look, with the consumer duty, it does actually sort of put that responsibility on providers to actually, look at the customer outcomes, and directly implied in that is that actually looking at the outcomes of customers from different backgrounds is something that would be really great practice. I know Edinburgh keeps dipping on and offline, so Tom, I don't know if you heard the question, but it was very much around consumer duty and whether you think there should be a requirement on financial services to actually measure and report in this area. So it'd be great. I'm picking on the financial services providers on this question because it seems probably most pertinent.
No, that's fine. And the connection's fine. I've just been turning my camera off so you don't have to look at me on the big screen all the time. Yeah, I think it's a really super interesting question. I think absolutely, we would welcome the right measures and measures that are reportable. And I think that's the thing. There's actually quite a lot of devil in the detail. So what isn't a good idea is creating a whole load of measures for measure's sake. And to Femi's point, we don't actually collect. We don't know what the ethnicity is of our customers. It's not a data point that we collect or that we're currently encouraged to collect. So that would be a significant systems and process change in itself when you're dealing with 70 million customers. So I don't know. I don't think we should mandate at this stage, but certainly, there's definitely a conversation to be had about what do we need to know. So this report is a bite in time, but what do we need to know in real time that allows us to make the adjustments that we need to make to ensure fairer outcomes for all?
Brilliant. Muna.
I was just going to come back and say, for me, the whole point of the consumer duty is a culture change. So I think if we start mandating targets, there are always ways that you can get around. It depends on the question that you ask. So I think it's more around how do we ensure that there is a culture change, and how do we ensure that there is relevance in the products and services that apply to the target audience of minority ethnic communities. And then they will come.
Brilliant, thank you. Neil, who's next in the room? Hello. What's your name and where do you come from?
Hello, thank you so much for this. My name is Nina Mohanty. I'm the founder of Bloom Money. We're an early stage fintech company serving diaspora communities. So this event is particularly apt. And we were not delighted, but happy to contribute to the report as well. I noticed that there was a reference to partner schemes in the call-outs and the quotes. And actually our flagship product at Bloom Money is a digital version of Partner, which others in this room might know as Ajo, Isusu, Hegbad, Jamaya, Committee. The names go on and on and on. I had prepared this question for Sarah, unfortunately, but actually I will turn it to all of you. One of the frustrations that we have had is explaining why anyone would choose to turn to their community and pool their money. I've specifically not said save, pool their money in this way and jump through quite a few regulatory barriers to actually launch. So I wonder, with all of the knowledge that you all have, what advice you have for those of us that are trying to actively build for these communities. How do we engage with the regulator? How do we engage with incumbents so that they understand these behaviors exist, that they are worth pursuing, that they are worth building products around?
Excellent. So panel, and on this I'm going to open it to everybody sitting on the stage because I think there may be some views from down the research end of the table as well. But who'd like to go first? I'm looking at Muna.
I'm biased because I know Bloom and I know how good they are. I think for me, the answer to that question is around the cultural representation has to apply to the regulator as well. So if you have people in the regulatory space who understand the needs of the communities that you're designing for, it becomes less of a hurdle for you to have to explain and re-explain. And I think there's something around understanding the motivations of communities. So pooling money, and I prefer pooling money. My parents have used Hugbid schemes for years, my aunties, everybody. And I think there's a element of pulling the community up together that comes from that, ensuring that you're able to thrive as a group as opposed to individually. And I think regulators and financial services need to understand those motivations to be able to support organisations like Bloom, but also encourage design within financial services that are reflective of the communities they're serving.
I'll maybe add something just in terms of a Fair4All Finance construct because, a lot of our work is actually working across both regulators and policymakers around how do you make sure those work together to enable innovation, to actually support those who are excluded. And so I suppose this is sort of one of our actions and offers of partnership is that we found that a really productive route with the FCA to be able to work with them on their innovation pathways. And we've got some fantastic advocates within the FCA, Sarah obviously, but in Sheldon, in Nisha Aurora, we have got some really powerful advocates who want to support and affect change and really understand the issues. So I guess that's the offer of partnership for action. Anyone else?
Thanks, Nina. I looked at your app. I think it's great. My dad ran a partner, so it would have saved him time because it could have all been done via an app. Also would have meant I got to see him more. I think, look, the FCA's, they're doing quite a lot of work when it just comes to diversity and inclusion. I don't have a lot more to add on what Muna said, but I think what's going to be important is making sure you have the right people around the room or around the table. And I say that because, it's something now I've been able to talk to my colleagues about, the partner, where it's come from. There's been a lack of trust. I do think that it does have its place in building financial inclusion, but ultimately it will come from a representation perspective. So something we did at Standard Life recently is we have pension schemes which are called master trust, and they're typically governed by about five to 10 individuals potentially. And it's well known in the industry that trusteeship is a white male job, and so we've looked to improve diversity of those boards. almost half of the women on master trust boards are now female. We're also looking to improve ethnicity as well, and that is going to help when it comes to decision making, but also risk management and innovation. But please do get in contact.
Brilliant, thank you. I've got quite a few coming through online, and I'd say Angola Singiyemba has got several questions, so I'm going to sort of try and amalgamate a bit of the two, and probably will do this really inelegantly, so correct me in the chat if I get it completely wrong. But I think there were two questions, which was, one is understanding the implication of how racial undertone plays out in systemic processes, and so has given an example in terms of how banks may use shared names as a check for account or financial connections. And really, has anyone heard of sort of things that banks are doing specifically to actually measure against sort of things that could be causing challenges? And also, allied to that, I think, is the extent to which colleagues with lived experience are able to bring that into their roles to help banks better design, and financial services institutions better design their processes. So I don't know, Tom sitting up there in Edinburgh, if you would like to start on that, because I know that NatWest have done a lot in this space.
Yeah, thanks, Sasha. I mean, obviously I referred to the inclusive design panel, which is one of the ways we're trying to take that a step further, because it's about people who work for the bank. They all have a job, and they all have a certain level of education, and so on and so forth. And the thing about the inclusive design panel is it's meant to give us access to as many different lived experiences as we possibly can to really try and think through our product and process design. So yes, absolutely, it's about getting the right colleagues around the table, and our our distribution colleagues and people actually involved in supporting and serving customers and delivering those products are involved in that process as well. But then it's also about getting this broader set of voices.
Muna.
So yeah, I just wanted to come in on the lack of data on this. So I think one of the things that you will find is that people are working towards inclusive design, but actually they don't know what their current processes and systems, the impact that they're having on their customers now. So one of the areas that we want to develop around the racial justice network is around, we know the ethnicity premium, people have been charged, of colour, have been charged £250 more for car insurance than their white counterparts. We know that black people are 4 times more likely, black Africans are 4 times more likely not to be approved for a loan in comparison to their white counterparts. But that data is just the tip of the iceberg. We see it in the work that we do at Rooted and Money A&E. So we need to understand more, and we need to do it in safe spaces. So it's not pointing fingers at organisations and saying, you're structurally racist, but it's about working out where those unintended consequences have come from, layers of barriers and processes, and how do we unpack all of that?
Brilliant, thank you. Peter.
So on the kind of lived experience thing, I mean, going back to the FCA consultation on diversity and inclusion, the logic there is this is about requirements on firms to report on the mix of their characteristics of their employees. And the logic of that is that if you have more people in firms from different backgrounds who are actually decision makers and involved in the day-to-day process of the firms, then some of these problems that people in firms will be going, hang on, why are we doing that? So you're actually bringing the lived experience into the decision making. The lived experience of different people and the diversity is brought into the decision makers, and that seems to me to be quite a good idea. The intuition is that the more diverse and inclusive firms are, then the better they will serve a diverse and include diverse customer base. So there's something there, and that's really important. The second thing on data, the data point, loan declines is really interesting. So about the way that kind of data and credit data works and credit decisions, we've been hammering away at the lack of transparency there for years and years and years. and it is a difficult issue. The one good thing is back to the FCA have a thing called the Credit Information Market Study, where they're looking at this and they're about to report, I think. So one of the things in the remedy packages is it talks about ensuring that data is fair and transparent and so on. So there's a great opportunity to bring in the experience and the stats that you were just describing, Muna, on why is it that certain communities, certain ethnic communities are being systematically or disproportionately poorly affected by the credit information system, is something that we can really hammer at and try and get the regulators to get into the data and that be on their question list. So there is an opportunity there.
Brilliant. And I thought I had read the signal. Kenny did that brilliant gentle signal, which I had spotted, and then a more overt signal to make sure I had spotted him. But Kenny, did you want to add something to this one?
No worries. I guess one of the things I'll probably, in terms of to answer that question, I think there's a big issue, particularly around risk, right? And I think that word hasn't been used enough today, but the question for me all the time, particularly whether it's this sector or other sectors that we work in, is who decides risk? And that's the fundamental question we always have to come to, because whoever decides risk, there's clearly a lot of bias there, which leads to where we are today, right? And so when you're thinking about even what you mentioned earlier about Bloom, for example, it's because the people that decide what is risky, who do they look like? And your whole perspective on risk is, a lot of it is also based on your experience and knowledge. And if something doesn't make sense, and you see a lot of this in like philanthropy in general, right? Where people are like, oh yeah, I don't want to give this money to the community or do this because they might just do this and this and this. And it's like, who told you that? And sometimes we have all these assumptions that if we do this, it's going to equal this. And a lot of times, actually, people on the other end also know, like, actually, if we get this, we can do this. And I think a big part of the issue here is to do with risk, who decides risk, and where that risk is. Clearly, there's a lot of bias. And I think one of the things that really is missing a lot of times in this is just common sense, about also understanding that difference doesn't mean risky.
Brilliant point. Thank you. One more point on this one, and I'm going to take another question in the room. Neil is doing very good to me on that, but yeah.
I just wanted to actually echo that. That's really interesting because I think this is my view, not my employer's view. But I do a lot on ESG, or just sustainable investing. And it's really interesting because now we see ESG being a managed, I guess, financial risk. And when I look at diversity and inclusion, I also see that personally as a financial risk as well. And I think if we can start changing, Muna talked about consumer duty to change the culture. I think if we can start changing our behaviours and actually understanding the D&I as a risk management tool, I think we'll then better serve the communities that we're trying to serve. Whether you're looking at it from a HR's perspective, financial director's perspective, you'll just see it as a risk which needs to be addressed. And just one last point for the pension industry, I think why it's really important is because people are forced to save into a pension. And so if we're not going to provide products for them, what we are going to just be fundamentally excluding them from everything. So yeah.
Brilliant point, thank you. Right, let me take, I think I've got loads more questions in the room. So Neil, do you want to get the microphone to who goes first? If I get everyone to just say what's your name and where do you come from to start with? Thank you.
Hello everyone, hi, Ugo from Trust for London. And yeah, this work is really important to us, so thank you. Two really quick questions. One is around the policy levers for change. I certainly welcome, some of the, what I would consider as recommendations. And my question would be, to what extent is there political will for some of these changes to take place? And I say that because I know the ethnicity pay gap has been mentioned. Now we know when it comes to the gender pay gap reporting, there is political will and there's consensus around that. The government have published guidelines, so to speak, but are hesitant and reluctant to really mandate employers to, report on their ethnicity pay gap. We're obviously looking to fund work around that through the Racial Justice Fund, as Muna mentioned. The second question is really more of a sort of a data question. And I'm just trying to understand how nuanced the data is. Now, I know the research is framed around two things. but I wanted to understand to what extent is the data also influenced by other disparities like housing, employment, etc. And yeah, there's a reason obviously for that.
Brilliant, great questions, thank you. And Peter, with your name, with your job title brilliantly being Head of Policy, it may or may not surprise you that I'm coming to you first in terms of policy and political appetite for change, and particularly where we are, I suppose, in the political cycle. And then, Aisha, I'm going to come to the research team in terms of data points. I'll probably come to you or Sarah. So.
It's a good question. Where are we now in the political cycle? We're in a funny place in the political cycle that we're approaching a general election year, and these kind of really important but new ones are hard to get up the agenda. I suppose the question there is how we build a consensus with a change of government of one form or another coming along after an election. It won't look quite like as it does now. It'll be a different set of priorities, whoever wins it. There's an opportunity to try and push this up the agenda. How can we all help in that? How can we push in our own organisations to start doing that work and showing a pattern and why it's needed? So it's hard to kind of get political buy-in always. What helps is building the larger the coalition behind it, the easier it's get. And also if you can then build the evidence base to show why it's needed. So if we show the evidence, stronger and stronger evidence of why it's needed, then we'll get there. So it is difficult, but there's steps towards it. On the point about how, just quickly on how the other researchers, how the other factors come in is a really good point. We did a piece of work quite recently, deep diving our data on why 63% of our clients are women and why it's so disproportionate. And then we started looking at some of the indicators. Women much more likely to have negative budgets, which is a big thing in debt advice. And then we found, single parents are even more likely to have negative budgets. And then we found single parents from minority ethnic communities more likely still to have negative. So all these things, and then you put housing on it, it matters enormously. These things all come together and create a sort of ball of different challenges. And often they line up. So people who are in poor housing also excluded from financial. If you're vulnerable to eviction, then you find yourself starting to get excluded from financial services. It compounds. So the policy challenge is how do you break those vicious cycles? So it's a good question.
And research team, anything you'd like to add? Because I know this is one of the questions when I was reviewing it was, how pure is this data?
Yeah, I'll quickly start it before passing to these guys. There's obviously such an interplay between lots of different factors, whether it's, like I said at the beginning, employment, housing, education and things like that. One of the things that we do see is that the way people from minority ethnic backgrounds experience poverty is different to their white counterparts, and it is worse, and it comes out much more when looking at things around housing tenure, crowding, people's access to mortgages, the amount of mortgage payments that they pay. There is a disparity even at those different stages as well. So it's complicated. There's lots of things there, but it doesn't. All of those things don't all explain financial exclusion, and there is a need to look at the products and services and that process as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to build on that, we wanted to make sure that we were being as granular as possible with the data. So comes back to the approach we talked about at the beginning and making sure we were bringing in lots of different sources into what we were doing. So obviously there's the survey itself, but also some of the findings from the financial research survey helped to support some of those things Aisha was just saying around the role of housing as being one of the complexities in the whole kind of interplay of different aspects of people's financial lives. So that is in the report, very much talked about. And in terms of the survey data, again, we did make sure that was granular. We sort of had a robust sample size. And as I mentioned up front, we made sure that it was representative on a number of dimensions, not just demographics, but also economic factors and social grade and things like that as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, I'm going to squeeze in 2 more questions, and then what I'll do is probably ask the panel just for any final calls to action before I actually let people mingle. And Right, so I've got a question here. Neil, did you have another one? And then I've got another lady here. Right, can I do something just to sort of, in the interest of time, can I ask each to get those 3 questions together and to keep them really tight? Jerry, yes, I am looking at you.
Hi, I'm Patricia Hamzai. I'm co-founder of something called Extend Ventures, and we focus very much on the same questions you've asked here, but access to funding for diverse founders, right? So businesses and startups. And the issues that you've outlined here is exactly the same for those founders. And in the end, we're talking about community wealth, right? And building, and being able to channel investment into our communities to make the whole community blossom. My question is, I'm grateful to see NatWest here. I'm grateful to see Standard Life here. I'm sorry, I don't know all the details of the report, and I will definitely download it and go through it. But I just wanted to know, in terms of the spectrum of banks and funders, how engaged have they been in this work? Again, there's a someone said gender pay gap code. There's an investing in women's code. There's never been an investing in ethnicity or even investing in diversity code within the industry. So I'd just like to know what response you've gotten from the wider finance community.
Brilliant question. Just so you know, I will come to Tom and to Femi on that one. So then, Jerry?
My question was, Muna's talked about the ethnicity premium, and Ugo actually talked about how it links to more than just finance. It's about housing and stuff. And this report is brilliant in the fact that it not only highlights a lot of these issues, it's actually talking about actions that can be done. I think my question's really to sort of the public and the private sector, some of the banks and the finance industry out here. I mean, we've talked about sort of targets and whether that should be a way to go. We talked about this being the right thing to do. But I mean, the data that we have here is really showing quite a compelling argument around the fact that diverse ethnic communities make up a large part of our population. And I mean, if we're looking at the sector, if they're looking at their own sort of profitability as businesses as well, is there not also a kind of argument and a point that by using evidence like this, there is a need to actually really look at the services they're designing and how that's impacting communities so that they can move forward? So the question really isn't really a question, it's more about, is there another compelling reason? And isn't that just about the fact that if you miss this market, you're missing massive opportunity for yourselves in the future? Just being cynical, we don't have to talk about being the right thing to do, we don't have to talk about targets, just about if you're a business and you want to continue to grow and develop and meet a growing consumer market in this country, you ignore this to your peril. So that's just a statement. So that'll help you with the answers.
It's a brilliant question statement. We can what are the consequences of financial services ignoring this issue? There you go, Jerry.
Hi, it's Catherine Townsend from Nationwide Building Society. I guess I'm just a bit worried how much longer things could take. We don't have the data. Even if we did agree to get the data doing the systems, would just take forever to do that. I guess there's something that all firms can take away from this, but what's the biggest thing we can do at an industry level to get action quickly from the report?
Fantastic. And I might co-opt you onto the panel to answer that one. You do know that. You knew that was coming. You know me. So what I'll do is I'll maybe start with Tom and Femi in terms of answers and then work through the panel to pick up any other things. And if it is okay, Catherine, I might come to you as well.
Shall I go first, Femi? Is that okay? Yeah, cool. So on the first, ignoring potentially 20% of your customer base is a really stupid idea. So I think we can all agree on that one. Or discriminating, not just ignoring, or discriminating against them. It just doesn't seem like good business at all. On the point about investment in businesses, as I said at the beginning, the work that Sham and her colleagues led on behalf of the bank did also focus on our support for businesses. We're the largest business bank for the UK. 1 in 4 businesses bank with us. And as a result of that, we did similar research to this, looking at minority ethnic-led businesses with the Centre for Research for Ethnic Minority Entrepreneurship, and we've worked with Black Seed Venture Capital, and a number of other organisations. Business in the Community is a very large organisation that we've worked with in a couple of cities to really try and sort of test and experiment with some different ideas. So absolutely, I'm not sure you always need a code or an initiative or a something else. I think you just need to sometimes you just need to experiment and practice and find stuff that works and then really go after it. And then the one on and then the other point from the last question is, I think, I mean, we completely agree. You could do trying to find the data forever and ever and ever. And I actually made this point at an APPG on race in workplace a week or so ago. If you know you're broadly right, then that's much better than being accurately wrong. So rather than spending a long time trying to get some data and then arguing whether it's accurate or not, if you're broadly right, go with it. And back to the point about experimenting and seeing where you can get to. So that's kind of some of the approaches that we've taken, and some of them, some of them fail horribly, and then you don't do anything more with them. You just go, we learned.
As a scientist, I very much approve of this approach of test and learn. Femi?
Thank you. I guess for the first question, sorry, I'm very bad with names, but the individual that spoke first. So at Standard Life, we kind of take a three-pronged approach. So we look at the customers, also looking at our colleagues, and also the communities. With regards to the communities, so we are actually looking to partner with a firm that focuses on social enterprise and providing funding for those individuals. We also actually run something called our Innovation Lab. Nina, get in touch, because this is where fintechs can essentially pitch their ideas to try and solve some of the most promising and pressing issues that we've discussed today, such as sustainable financial inclusion. So we're looking at various individuals who I can't name, I just realised. But yeah, we're doing something there. In terms of the second question, absolutely. If we look at Rihanna and the Fenty brand, ultimately, they found the market. I don't like this word, but they exploited it, and they're making billions. If we look at Nike, the hijab that they produced, lots of backlash, but they're solving a purpose. The list goes on and on and on. And I think that's why I made the point where I spoke to someone else at Fair4All Finance, Jake, and I made the point that you'll have the HR leader, you might have the person that wants to do the right thing, you might have the person that wants the commercial, there's a commercial imperative, you'll have the legal person. It's just, the list goes on and on and on. But fundamentally, the workforce is changing. If not, it has changed. If we look at the census, back in 2011, about 3.5% of individuals were identified as Muslim. That's now doubled. So yeah. And then the last question, Catherine, I did catch your name because I was like, I haven't got any of the names. Let me listen. I sensed an urgency from you, and I think that's what everyone in this room has, and that's what we need. We have to continue to drive the conversation. Data, definitely an issue, but what we've done, and it's not the greatest way, but we've used proxies. So we've looked at people's surnames, for example. Of course, this has its own issues, but it's just one way of trying to understand what your customer workforce looks like. So thank you.
Right, I'm going to go down the row, including Frank Penny. Do you want to pick this?
So I'll start off going backwards. Your question, and I think the urgency is needed. I think there are clear calls to action and recommendations in the report. I would urge you, if you're not part of the practitioner group, to join the practitioner group. She is on it, good. And thinking about ways that you can use proxies via collaborations with organisations that are close to those communities. You can use lived experience, but really thinking about things that you can start to test and learn whilst you're getting that data in. So I think there are the ways you can do that. Patricia's question was really interesting, and I think there's something around, we're not keen on mandating things when it comes to ethnic minorities, but we are keen when it comes to other vulnerabilities and minorities. So I think things like the ethnicity pay gap, and there are some things that have to be done. And I think we would welcome that. And I think it's clear that the gap is there, not just in the individual side, but also the business side and the founder's side. So I would welcome that. And from Jerry's statement question, I would say it makes complete not business sense to ignore that bigger market. And actually, the results are already bearing out in the report. So the main banks are already losing customers to challenger banks who are much more agile and much more in tune with the people that they're designing for. So I would say if you do nothing, you snooze, you lose.
Yeah, no, mine won't be quick just because of time. I guess the question around, there's several things I want to bring forward. The question around whether there should be quotas or not is always an interesting one because that always makes people feel uncomfortable. It's like, oh yeah, let's just culturally get there and hopefully people will change their mind. And unfortunately, I'm sure some people have been here probably longer than I've lived and the issues are still the same. So I think people are a lot of times waiting for change in that way. You might be here all day. And I think people have to be very honest about that. So though I don't necessarily always agree with having targets, but to be honest, in work, if you don't have targets, things don't get done. So I don't know why all of a sudden in the corporate world, everyone has amnesia. So it's the reality, right? Everyone gets assessed and you have to have targets and metrics and you either hit them or you don't. And it's that simple. So therefore, I don't really buy the whole thing of let's wait. And I think particularly if there's a sense of urgency, you just get things done. So that's just where I stand on that. But then again, coming back to this whole question which Jerry talked about before, and that, well, Sasha gave the shorter version. But essentially, I think there is a whole issue around when we talk about banks and how they need to move forward. Banks don't need to have a sense of urgency, right? If anyone has looked at the news of recent, the monopoly they have on this industry, even the big five, right? They've already made almost, £37 billion of profit from last year that's been recorded. And then off that, though they made a lot of profit off the fact of interest rates going up, which they didn't actually give the benefits to the consumer, they didn't get no extra tax. They still paid their 3%, whilst the other providers had a whole levy and they paid 35%. So again, though we're talking about change, why would people change when they're so comfortable? They have a monopoly over the industry. They are raking in billions, and then now the banker bonuses and other things have now been lifted. And so I think, to be honest, I think it's as clear as day, the direction. And so I think with conversations like this, we have to be realistic about, yes, there's this growing market of 20% of people, but if I'm making billions and over the next 6 years I could make another 150, then that 20% is clearly doesn't really mean much when you're making all that money anyway. And this might sound cynical, but you do have to understand it from that position. So though we're having this conversation, if you are in that position where over the next 6 years, however long, you pretty much have it in the bag, why would you be so urgent? And then also everybody else that wants to try and do something else, but due to risk, those people can't get the same opportunities that you have. So again, until we change what risk looks like, we'll never change and level the playing field.
What's great is when you get diverse views on a panel. And what's fantastic is having heard from Tom saying, why would we ignore 20% of our customers? And I think there was a question online in terms of, how interested are people in this area? This is probably one of the few areas in our work where I've had people actively lobbying to be on the practitioner group and asking why they're not on it. And I think that's a really positive sign. I am going to come to you because you have been a really sort of, step forward and get involved on that group. So what would you say as a call to action to the room?
Well, I think that, we started collaborating back in January or this time last year. It's taken time for this to come out, and I'm really looking forward to reading the detail of the research. But collaboration is key. I think that there's an opportunity to learn from one another. We've seen that in other areas, and I really hope that Consumer Duty, with this lens, can further enhance that, and we can start to knowledge share and best practice. And I'm going to look to UK Finance as well over in the corner on that point. But I want, obviously, I think everyone should reply to the D&I consultations, the FCA. So we've got this opportunity. There were 55 mentions of the word consumer in that, but it was still unclear. It was hypothetical. If we do A, then B will happen. Let's make that stronger. But I wonder whether a quick win could be something around language. I see regularly the exclusion by language. We could link that to consumer understanding principle. And if we could do more as an industry around opening up for different languages, then we could make traction quicker and start to get different thinking as well in that regard.
That's brilliant. And once you delve into the report, I think one of the things that I think is really interesting in terms of inclusive design, that hey, guess what? When you design things to include the most excluded, you make the system better for everybody. And you may notice when you get to the language bit that it isn't that you've got the people who are native English speakers are saying, well, it's really easy to understand, we ain't got a problem. Everybody finds engaging with financial services information quite hard. So improving that is absolutely at the heart of consumer duty. I know it's something that NatWest and Standard Life will have been working on pretty heavily. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ask people for maybe one last comment. Peter, I'll start with you and I'll come down the panel, and Tom, I may give you the last word because I think, it has been really powerful having big financial institutions really committed to engaging in this area. So whilst Kenny, I respect your views, I think what is great is we have actually got a level of engagement that is probably the most engaged across all the areas we're working with, which is really positive. So Peter, let me start with you.
Thanks. So very quick thought. So I said at the start that what a good roadmap these recommendations are. What about a commitment from the financial services industry to come back and report in a year's time on the progress that individual firms and collectively you're making on those recommendations? So we've got a sense of movement, a sense of actively reporting what's happened in a year since this report that's made a difference, and then commit to doing that regularly afterwards. That would be a legacy for this piece of work. We see the change happening.
Muna.
I would echo what Peter said, but I would also add the point around actively engaging in things like the FCA consultation, making sure that your voices are heard. And I would like to also see where people are engaging with those financial services. They are given the credit for actually having that conversation, but also their feet are held to the fire in terms of what action and what progress has been made. And I would like to see that in 12 months where we are.
I just want to say it's a fantastic report again. It helps me do my job because I think we would struggle to essentially do some sorts of research like this unless we're externally. I think it comes back to what we've heard in the audience today about collaboration, risk, but also just trying to innovate for those who are typically excluded, and that could therefore then benefit everyone going forwards. So, yeah, thank you.
And Tom.
I think, so thinking about the group that's going to take the recommendations forward, and we've heard a lot today about kind of diversity of perspective and view, I'd like to see a wider range of financial services companies there. It's not just sort of a few challengers and the big banks. It struck me that Gatehouse isn't there, for example, and they know a lot about Sharia compliant finance. It struck me that there aren't credit unions obviously represented around that table, and they know a lot about community saving schemes. So I just thought, let's get a bigger coalition and more perspectives, because it'll make sure we get better outcomes.
Brilliant. So look, everybody, thank you, everyone in the room, and also everybody joining online. I hope that I haven't stretched your patience too much by stretching us, I think, 13 minutes beyond the bit where we thought we would break for a bit of networking. But I think if there's one thing I'd ask everyone to take away is this concept of start before you're ready. It's very, very easy to put off doing anything until you have a perfect solution. And I don't think any progress in humanity has happened without people just actually saying, here is what I think could work, let's try it and see. And you've heard that, I think, actually consistently from people across the panel. And the more that we work together on this, the more we can share that learning and move forward together. The time for talking is over. It's now time to act. Thank you, everybody.